Hi guys, Brian here. Now today I'm going to be talking about my journey through publishing, from my beginnings to current day, and do a little bit of projection of what I hope to be doing in the future. I'm going to tell you all about my triumphs and my failures, my joys and sorrows, and a little of everything in between. So here we go. Sit back and listen up.
Welcome to the Cube with Brian D. Anderson.
Now, ever since I was a little kid, I dreamed of being a writer. I dreamed of writing the perfect novel that everybody couldn't wait to get their hands on. Walking into the bookstore and seeing my book on the shelves. No, that's true. I wanted to be a baseball player. And an astronaut, I think. But as a teenager, I wanted to be a rock star, and I tried to be a rock star well into adulthood, and obviously failed miserably at that. Now, while it was my wife who initially encouraged me to take my writing more seriously, it was a 7-year-old little boy who launched my career. Now, that little boy, my son, Jonathan, is now a young man, about 1.5 years away from going to college. I'm no longer daddy, I'm dad. I'm not a superhero anymore, I'm just a man. Which is the way it's supposed to be. I do miss it. But I do remember that first day, that day that he came home. That eager expression, those excited words that came out of his mouth, the kind that only a young child has. And if you've been around young children, you know the one I'm talking about, that they look like they're about ready to explode if they don't tell you what's on their mind. Now, here's the part of the story where I'm supposed to say that I was super dad and immediately dropped everything to listen to what he had to say, but that's just not true. I sort of shoved him away. I shoved him aside. I did not want to hear it. I was tired. I was into what I was doing and figured I'd, hear him later, push it aside. So he goes to his mother and tells her what was on his mind. And she comes to me. You need to listen to your son. He's got something he wants to tell you. He's got something, And I really didn't want to. So I put it aside a little bit more. Because I was being a selfish jackass. But in the end, I looked down and there he was with that expression on his face. Something inside me clicked and I realized I was being a bad father, that I needed to pay attention to my son, and I did. And if I had continued being selfish, I wouldn't be talking to you right now. Because he says to me, Dad, I have an idea for a story. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, why don't you tell me about it? What came out of his mouth was so astonishing that I was speechless for almost a minute after he stopped talking. I just couldn't believe what he had told me. And the first book of the Goblin Chronicles, the prologue, is action for action what he told me. If you want, if you're curious about what he had to tell me that day. Now, the writing is amateurish because I was an amateur, and that's being generous actually. But the concept is solid, and I had to change some things. Like the main character is named Gooey. I couldn't change that. He got very upset when I wanted to change that. But I changed these, many aspects of the characters, to make them fit into a real story. I mean, he was 7. And he was very creative, obviously, but he was still 7. So, and by the way, if anybody's ever wondering why the main character is named Gooey, it's because when I wanted to change it, he looked at me like I had broken his favorite toy. And I'd already changed so much, I just didn't have the heart to do it. So that's also why I gave the character a cool god name in the third book. So anyway, so he tells me this idea, and I was like, yeah, I'll write it for you. He asked me if I'd write it. I'm saying, absolutely. I put off the crap I was doing and banged it out. And it happened in about 8 weeks, maybe 12. My wife says 12, I say 8, but she's probably right. Anyway, I had a full-length novel there. 112,000 word novel at the end of it. And I mean, it still needed a lot of work, but there it was. Just because my 7-year-old wanted to be part of what I was doing. Now, at this point, I didn't think I had a whole new career. But the idea was starting to form. What happened next was I queried agents, and all of them loved my writing and couldn't wait to take me on as a client. Sent it to the publishers, and I was a overnight success. And if you believe that, I have a bridge in Brooklyn I want to sell you. Now, what really happened was a big, long struggle. The industry that surrounds independent publishing you see today didn't exist. There were no editors. I mean, none. And people who were saying that they were editors, 99% of the time were not editors. Cover art was almost impossible to find. Doing interior designs for paperbacks was nigh impossible to find anybody who would do it for a reasonable price. And if you tried to learn to do it yourself, you had to have special programs. It was a big nightmare putting a quality book together, or something that could at least halfway compare to what at the time was the Big Six. This is before Penguin and Random House became the Random Penguin. And before all, there was just no way to do it. And when you finally did get it together, you felt like you'd been beat up. And that's kind of the way it went. I struggled a long time to put together a quality product, and when it finally happened, lo and behold, people liked it. I couldn't believe it. People liked it as much as I believed in it, but I believed in it in that kind of way that a kid believes in Santa Claus. I didn't ever think I'd really see the sleigh flying across the sky, but hey, there it was. So the book 1 starts doing well. I put out book 2 starts doing well, and book 3, wow! By the time book 3 came out, Podium Publishing had approached me. They were audiobook publishers, and they had done Andy Weir's The Martian, and the only other client they had that I knew about was a guy named Ben Hale, and it's just basically when I signed, it was us, the three of us, were their primary clients. Of course, Andy Weir being the big guy with the movie. Anyway, I had my audio deal. My books were doing well. Moved my family out of New York. We went to Milton, Florida. It was just more affordable, and my sister-in-law, rather, I should say, moved to Pensacola, Florida. So we were about 30 minutes from there, and we're about only an hour from where I grew up. But I could see the end of my career coming. The end of the Goblin Chronicles was fast approaching. I didn't know where I was going to go from there. I was very afraid that after the Goblin Chronicles ended, that I wouldn't have a career. Thing about indie publishing, it does change. It does, it's very fluid, and you've got to adapt constantly. And I was doing a good job at adapting to what was changing back in those days. But I could see a time when, the good times would end. And I needed to do something. And around that time, I had a friend named Tom Rydell who had a blog radio show called The Writer's Lounge. And I had co-hosted with him a couple times and been a guest a couple times. And I suggested we do a 3-author panel with myself, Hugh Howey, and Michael J Sullivan. Now, I didn't know Michael or Hugh at the time personally, but I knew how to get in touch with them, and I figured, what the hell? see if they'll, all they can say is no. But they both said yes. So we do this author panel. And it was a lot of fun. But I thought I'd take advantage of the fact that I had a way to contact them, and they now knew who I was. So first I contacted Hugh Howey, and he's a great guy. He was very kind and very supportive, and he gave me some career advice. But the problem with taking Hugh on as a model for my own success was Hugh had lightning in a bottle. His wool nearly broke the internet. I couldn't replicate his success. I didn't know how. I probably don't even have the ability. What he did was amazing. Now, Michael J. Sullivan, on the other hand, he had gone from being an indie, made the transition successfully into traditional publishing when he signed with Orbit. And I sort of saw that as more of a path I could take. So Michael also was very happy to talk to me, and he was very kind to introduce me to my agent. Now that was a milestone right there. But he introduced me to Lori McLean at Fuse Literary, and after much deliberation, she decided that I was worth the risk and took me on as a client. And then my career took off with Tor. No, that's not what happened. That's not what happened at all. A little more to it than that. Now, what happened next was my foray into traditional publishing. Now, I wrote, the Goblin Chronicles was finally over. I had an agent. It was time to move on. So I wrote book 1 of Dragonbane. I liked it. I thought it was great. Thought it was a great series, and I thought it was, something that people would enjoy. It was a little more adult with the content, but that was all right. Lori liked it. She sent it off to the editors, and no, absolutely not. Rejection after rejection after rejection, and it was the first time I'd really been through that kind of experience, and it was very disheartening. I mean, after 6 novels, I had gotten better at writing, and so none of the rejection letters criticized the way I wrote the book. They only criticized the story and what they didn't like about that. But Lori, undeterred, managed to get me a nice little audio deal with Audible this time, and we moved forward, and things were going great. The audiobook ended up as a top 5 finalist for Book of the Year. The year Jim Butcher won, and I came in second, not fifth. Second, not fifth. Okay, probably fifth, but I tell people second. Anyway, so I was pretty happy with the way things were going. But again, I could see the end coming. The end of Dragonbane was coming, and I had to do something. Now I had the tools, I had the agent. All I needed now was another book, another series, another story. So on we go to Akira. Now as a kid, loved me some Conan. That's how I was first introduced to Robert Jordan. Loved the books, loved the comics, loved the graphic novels, loved the movies. And I figured I couldn't be the only one. So I sort of wrote a series that had that type of character, but less misogynistic, less 1980s, I suppose. It's a modernized version of Conan is kind of the way I used to describe it. And Akira is a series I love dearly. I still love it. I got one more book in it that I'm writing. And I co-authored some of the books with Stephen Saville, and who is a brilliant writer. He worked for Warhammer, Pathfinder, Doctor Who. He even wrote a Sherlock Holmes novel for that franchise. He's a dear friend of mine, and he's worth checking out if you get the chance. But unfortunately, again, no from traditional publishing. Shot down at every turn. They did not want it. So, maybe it was just because nobody wanted that type of fantasy. Who knows why? But we did get a nice little audio deal out of it, and I was kind of disappointed because I was very optimistic, and so was Lori, but no, it just didn't happen. I was wondering where this career of mine was headed. Now, I finally had come up with a plot line for a follow-up to the Goblin Chronicles, and fans had been at me for a long time to continue with that story. So I figured, let me step back a little bit, let me go back to my roots, and let me do something that I know I love. And so that's what I did. I outlined the new Goblin Chronicles sequel, wrote that book. Audible was very interested in it. They gave me a nice audio deal. This was not something I'd be sending to traditional publishing because this was a sequel to an existing indie series. And so a lot of the pressure was off. And that was, that's something I needed. And through that time, I came up with the idea for another series entitled The Veil. Now, let me tell you about The Veil. One of the things I enjoy, other than reading and, of course, writing books, is I like playing RPGs. I mean Final Fantasy. I mean Tales of. And yes, Elder Scrolls. Elder Scrolls really isn't a part of what I did next. More like Final Fantasy and Tales of. The plots and the storylines and the characters, I just found delightful. They were just amazing to me. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if I took this type of layered plot structure and these character types and novelized it? And, in a completely different original world, and took all that and structured it in a novel form. Now, I know there's things called lit RPG and game lit and all that. I wasn't aware of it. I didn't know it had been done before. But I thought I was being original, and, I should have known better. But I came up with an idea and came up with a good storyline and wrote The Veil, the first book in The Veil. And I was excited about The Veil. I sent it to Lori and she got excited about The Veil. And we thought we really had something. And I told her we approached Audible first before we went to traditional, being that I was kind of like not wanting to deal with more rejection letters, and I wanted to just see what Audible would say first. And they gave me an amazing deal. So I was like, if I take this, then any chance for traditional publishing is out the window, because they're not going to want this book without the audio rights. And we knew this, going in. But, like I said, the deal was too good to turn down, so we took the deal. But we're like, what the hell? Let's try to sell the other rights to the Big Five. So I wasn't all that concerned because I've been turned down so many times at this point. Whatever. Well, as it turned out, one of the editors over at Tor took a look at it and really, really liked it, and said to us that yes, I would have offered on The Veil, except that you sold the audio rights. So I'm like, oh, you got to be kidding me. You got to be kidding me. This can't be happening. It's not that I was upset with the deal I made with Audible. It's just like, all this time I've been trying to break into traditional publishing, and I basically killed my own chances. But there was some silver lining behind that. They said they wanted to hear more from me when the time came. When I had something new, they wanted first look. So I was like, oh my God. And that, my friends, is how we get to the Bard's Blade. Now, the way this happened is sort of unique. I just finished The Veil. I and right before I started the Veil, I had just finished the first book in the sequel to the Goblin Chronicles, and I was really brain burnt. So I tried to do some flash fiction to kind of recharge my creative side and do something different, and failed miserably at flash fiction. It was supposed to be 300 words. I had to include 2 specific words into it, and it was based on a piece of fan art for one of Mark Lawrence's books. So, couldn't keep it under 300 words, but by the end of it, I had an idea for a whole new series, a whole new storyline, and a whole new world had developed around this. So, excited as I was, I banged out like 3 or 4 chapters and sent them over to Lori. And she told me, no. You got to finish what you're doing here. And I was like, yeah, you're right. I do need to finish this. And so I shelved it for a little while. Now, when you fast forward over to Tor saying they want to take a look at my next thing, I remind Lori, I do have those chapters I sent you. And she was like, yeah, well, give me a synopsis and a pitch letter and we'll send it over. So that's what we did. They wanted to see my next thing. Here's my next thing. Unfortunately, they needed a full manuscript because the world is very complex and it's a very expansive world. They needed to see something more substantial than a 3-chapter introduction. So I shove everything to the side. I bang out the full manuscript in record time. Give it off to one of my editors that I work with, do a quick edit on it, and we send it over. And we tell Tor that we're going to give them a 1-month exclusive because Lori was going to BEA, Book Expo of America, and going to shop it there. And, but we'd give it to Tor, and make no other attempts to sell it until, during the interim. Unfortunately, the editor who wanted to see it had moved up in the world and had been promoted. And so it was passed over to a young lady named Lindsay Hall. And she's one of the senior editors and had come over from Orbit and had worked with Nicholas Eames and a couple other very talented authors. But she had no reason to be excited about anything I'd written. So what I expected to happen was, hey, a month isn't enough. Do what you got to do. We need more time to think about it. Because, the traditional world moves slower. Well, that's what I expected to happen. That's not what happened. What did happen was we sent them the book on Friday. Monday arrives and they say they're interested. Now, you could have knocked me over with a feather. I was so shocked. And then when a deal memo comes back on Wednesday, I had to pinch myself to make sure I wasn't dreaming. Not only did a deal memo come packed, but it was exactly what I hoped they would offer me. I was so scared that they would try to lowball me and that I wouldn't be able to accept an offer because I'd have to spend the rest of my career saying I turned down a deal from Tor. My God, that would torture me for the rest of my life. But that's not what happened. It unfolded exactly how I hoped it would. Now, the editing process and working with Lindsay has been just a dream come true. All the nightmarish stories I'd heard about going into traditional publishing, I'm sure some of them are true, but that's not my experience. I am so grateful that things unfolded the way they did. And now what's next? What I plan to do from here, now that The Bard's Blade is almost ready for publication, comes out January 28th, is I'm going to finish up the books that I have that I owe Audible, which I owe them 3 more books, the final Akira book, the final Goblin Chronicles sequel, and the final Veil book. But I'm well on my way on those 3, and I have one more book to write of the Sorcerer's Song, which is the name of the series that The Bard's Blade is in. And then I have a new series in mind. I already have 80,000 words written. Now, my hope is that if The Bard's Blade does well, that Tor will be interested in picking up my next series. Now, if they do, who knows what will happen next. But here's one thing I do know. I'm going to tell you all about it. So I guess that's it. That's a sort of brief journey through my publishing life. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope I didn't put you to sleep. If so, wake up! Anyway, this is Brian D. Anderson, and this is The Q. Hey, don't forget to like and subscribe and check out the links below. Check out my Patreon page where there's exclusive content. And buy my books. That would be great. Hey,